Hello and welcome to the Healing Element Podcast. I am your host, Kai Marie, and you are in for a treat tonight. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. You can catch new episodes every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today, we're going to be talking about spiritual journey. So are you on a spiritual journey? If you don't know, if you're like, what are you even talking about? Then you're in the right place. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and what you need to know if you are on one. And I'm really excited for my guest today. Gianna is joining us, and she is an author. She has her own podcast, so she's going to tell us all about that. So welcome to the platform.
Thank you so much, Kai. Thank you for having me. And this is just great. I'm very excited to talk to you and also to be heard today.
Awesome. And so really quick background, when I moved to Charlotte, that's where I'm based. And Dewey and I were like looking for a place. We're like, okay, are we going to be able to find like a metaphysical store that we can buy crystals and like all the things that we were purchasing before when we lived in Connecticut? And we did. We found a space here in Charlotte. So with that being said, I do want you guys to learn more about the store that I'm speaking of, because I think that if you are on your journey, no matter where you are, beginning, confused, I think that we're going to get a lot of good information today, and also some items that you can begin to purchase to help you along your path. So with that being said, Gianna, could you please introduce yourself to the Healing Element Podcast fam?
Of course. So my name is Gianna Spriggs. And as Kai said, I am an author. I have my own podcast, the Curio Curandera Podcast, which is all about finding your spirituality and learning that there's not one way to be spiritual. And I am the founder of Curio Curandera LLC, where I do energy work and have my books and stuff like that. But I am also the co-owner of my family's store, Curio Craft and Conjure, which is located here in Charlotte. And that is actually how I met Kai. The store is a family love, you could say, that my mom and I have together. And we have been working on the store for 3 years and at the store for 3 years. And we really just enjoy helping people find their spiritual path. And Curio honors spiritual traditions and spirituality from all over the world. We recognize that melting pot magic is kind of the way to go, because there's not one way that we look as individuals, and there's not one way that our spirituality should look.
And that's one thing that I loved about walking into Curio. Like, first of all, you immediately feel welcomed. It's a warm, inviting energy that exists in the store. So it doesn't matter where you are on your path, because I've walked into some stores and it's like, oh, I feel like I should know exactly everything when I walk in, but because it's so inviting, so warm, that it's really will help you at any point on your path. So I highly recommend, if you're not in the Charlotte area, definitely go online and visit the store, and all of that information can be found in the description box. So with that being said, we're going to jump into our conversation tonight, and please be sure to drop your questions or comments. We want to make sure that we address them as we move through the episode. So can you share with us a little bit about your spiritual journey? And when did you become aware, like, oh my God, I'm actually on a spiritual journey? When did it become like a conscious thing for you?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. So, I was raised in all things spiritual and metaphysical. My mom has been reading tarot for over 40 years. This was just something that was part of my life. And I was always like, no, I'm not going to do it. I would help her at her events and everything like that. And people would always walk up to me and go, are you a mini Gina? I was just like, no, I'm my own person, which I am. And I still am. And I even went to school to be a chef and actually studied, and worked in the restaurant industry for 6 years. And then in 2016, multiple family members died. And I took that actually very hard. One of them was my father, and I thought I was going to go crazy. I couldn't imagine or fathom no longer being able to talk to these people, even though I had been raised with, hey, this is a thing. You can do this stuff if you want to. I had always been kind of pushing it away and was like, oh no, that's my mom's thing. But after losing my dad and some other family members, I really needed something to cling on to. And so that is what I took as the invitation to become more spiritual. And I actually quit my job, started meditating every day, and I meditated every single day for multiple times a day for a year until I kind of started feeling this semblance. And it wasn't until probably midway into that I was like, oh, this is my journey now. Mm-hmm. I'm not, following what my mom did only. I'm not doing things like going through the motions, because I always had an altar and things like that, but it was almost like I was going through the motions. And then it was about 6 months into that I was like, oh no, this is really what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. And this is my journey.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so powerful. What you're saying is that it looks different for everybody. And that's one thing that is a continuous theme that those that are listening now or watching the replay, that you'll see that it's all about finding your own path, and that there isn't, as you've said in open, there isn't like a particular way it has to look, but it's kind of like how you're being led. Would you agree to that?
Yes, definitely. Actually, the closing line of my podcast is follow your path, because everyone's path is unique. There are billions of people on Earth. That would be a really, really rundown path if we all went down the same one.
Right. It's so true, because I also think about, we all have different experiences. We're all healing from different type of traumas. So how could the path look the same when we all are having a totally different experience here on Earth?
Exactly.
So with that being said, for those that are listening and you're still maybe a little like, I'm not quite sure how I fit in this conversation, we want to start with the beginning, if you will. So if you are a person that you're listening to this and you're saying like, I may be on something, I don't know if it's a spiritual journey or what, but I am kind of questioning the world around me. I'm starting to question thoughts that I have or that I used to have. And I feel like I'm kind of moving away from that. So what do you say to people, Gianna, kind of who are in that space of, they're like, I think I'm beginning something. I'm not quite sure what it is, because I'm sure a lot of those people probably find yourself into the store, into Curio.
So what I typically tell people is, trust yourself, like trust your gut, because we have 3 minds. We have our gut, we have our heart, and then we have our brain. Our brain is always going to find logic in everything. Our heart is always going to try to find love, but our gut is what's going to tell us our like instincts. Mm-hmm. So, when your gut's saying, hey, things are looking a little different and everything like that, trust that. And, if you were to come into Curio and be like, hey, I don't know where I'm at, I would literally tell you, look at what you're attracted to, because that's going to be where you start. When you start with what you're kind of going towards naturally, then you can get down this rabbit hole that you enjoy in spirituality. And it's like, oh, I really like crystals. Cool. Keep going with that. And, everything is going to tie in eventually. So just go with what it is that you're attracted to first. Because if you go into saying, well, I should learn this, or I should be doing it this way, it's going to feel like school, or it's going to feel like work. And, not everyone enjoys school and work. Mm-hmm. And then it's going to be one of those, well, if I wanted to go right back into something organized, I would stay where I am.
Right. So true. And I think personally on my journey, what made it fun and a little scary, but that I didn't know what the rules were. Mm-hmm. So I was just kind of like, I like crystals. I like sage, and I came across sage. So I was just kind of like exploring, and there were no boundaries. I didn't know kind of like what it was supposed to look like, because I was just kind of like on this path. So I think that's so key. Again, going back to what we've been saying, that it's about you discovering who you are in this process, and not modeling it after someone else, because your experience is going to be totally different than anybody else's.
It is. It'll be completely different. As you were saying earlier, each one of we're just so different. And, how we do things is going to be different. And each one of our traumas, each one of our, anything from our past is going to be different. Yes, there might be similarities, but the same thing could happen to you that happened to me. And you and I, being different people, could react in two completely different ways. Right. And both ways are fully valid. Mm-hmm. So why can't spirituality be the same way?
So true. And so just want to say, if you are watching us right now, be sure to hit that like button. And also, if you have any questions, comments, just drop in the chat. If you're kind of questioning some maybe thoughts you're having, emotions you're experiencing, especially during the time that we're in right now, just drop them in the comment box and we'll be sure to address. So kind of moving the conversation along, for those, this is the big one that we were talking about earlier, the sign. So this is like a big question, because we just got through laying out how everybody has different experiences, and it's like, so what are the signs? Of course, so for everyone it's going to be different, but can you walk us through some signs that some people may experience? And it doesn't mean, if you're experiencing something that's not mentioned, it doesn't mean that you're not on a spiritual journey. This is kind of a big generalization of some emotions or thoughts that you may have.
Yeah. So actually, this was a great question. And I was just telling Kai earlier that I was practicing it. I was thinking about it. I was talking to everyone in my sphere of influence. And I was like, oh, what am I going to say to this? Because it, like 9 times out of 10, you don't know you're on a spiritual path or you're going through your spiritual awakening until you're already at the metaphysical store going, well,
here I am.
Here I am. So what do I need? So I will say that first, there's the invitation. And what I mean by that is something might happen. There might be something that is like a catalyst or the recognition of patterns in your life that just keep going on. And instead of, being at that point where you're like, woe is me, you're like, okay, so this keeps happening. I need to do something about it, or something needs to be done. And so that to me is like that step one. Even if we're not fully aware of it in that moment, that's step one. It's that recognition of patterns or past traumas and wanting to do that homework to really work through it. And then from there, it goes into, sometimes we go through these points of time in our lives where we might be going out a lot or doing this and doing that. And we start feeling this almost like a lack of fulfillment, like these things that used to make you feel fulfilled no longer do that. Now, I will say, be mindful, depression is a thing. So there is that. And I am not minimizing that at all. But what I mean is when, you're sitting at that bar with your friends and you're just like, this is boring now. Like there's something about this, I almost like what is it? From one of the movies, I'm getting too old for this shit. Like, you get that point where it's like, this isn't right anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that would be that step 2, because you went from wanting to heal or go through this to being at that point where you're on your healing journey. And then these things that you used to do beforehand, you're like, that's not me anymore. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's that recognition of synchronicities. Like, have you ever just started noticing all these things that you never noticed about life before? And it's almost like, all of a sudden you're looking at the clock and it's 11:11 every day, or you're, every time you get in the car, this one song comes on and it brings you to a specific memory, like a very specific point in time. Or, you're noticing things in nature that you never noticed before. It's always like, notice what you notice, because that's that start. And I will say, there's going to be a point in time where you kind of feel like you're going crazy, because it's like all of a sudden, everything means something. And sometimes it does, and then sometimes it doesn't. Like, that is also a thing. Sometimes our brains get so like, oh, this. But you almost feel like you're going crazy, and you're not. You're just waking up to all of these different things that life has to offer. Yeah, and that we've been muted to.
Yeah. And so when you're on that path and you're starting to wake up, you know what, when you said that, it made me think of like someone coming out of a slumber, when you're kind of waking up and you're stretching. Especially, have you ever had like that deep sleep and you wake up confused?
Yes.
Like, you're like, what time is it? What day is it?
What's the year?
Right. What year is it? Where am I? And it's like you're kind of waking up out of that, and you're trying to kind of ground yourself. Like, okay, I'm in bed. All right, now I'm starting to kind of get my grounding and knowing where I am. And that's almost what it's like on that spiritual awakening. It's that you're coming out of like this deep slumber, and there's some confusion there. And there may be points where it's just like, I don't even know where I am. I don't know what I'm doing. But that's all that beautiful experience of beginning to find your way.
It is. It's like you're reconnecting with who you were before everything.
Yeah. And when you said that, it makes me think of one of my favorite books, The Four Agreements. And this is like towards the beginning of the book, where the author is talking about Don Miguel Ruiz. How could I not say the author's name? So when he's talking about that indoctrination and how it's being poured into us when we're little, like how we need to be in society, how we need to behave. And so at that young point, like we're kind of just like a sponge, and now we're kind of like soaking up all this information of what our adults, many times well-meaning, are kind of pouring into us, because they're kind of giving us their life lessons, maybe their traumas, their experiences, kind of pouring into us. And sometimes, that has an impact on how we kind of grow and mature into adulthood. Was that something that resonates with you?
Yes, definitely. It's almost like, our parents, they teach us these things so that we don't make the same mistakes that they make. And, that's going out throughout childhood, throughout high school. We go into school and the teachers are like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. And, everyone's put in these little boxes, only to grow up and find out the box doesn't even exist.
Which blows your mind.
Yeah. And then you're like, what? It's like, and then, growing, it's almost like when you turn 18 and then you realize that the adults all along didn't know everything and they were just kind of winging it. And you're like, oh, wait. Okay. And it's that spiritually. And so now it's time to like wring out that sponge to make sure that, we hold on to some of it and we retain the knowledge, but we don't need to we have to work through going through these things and no longer harboring these feelings or any of these things, because sometimes it's not ours to begin with. So, let's get back to ourselves and let's refine ourselves and reconnect with, that inner child who you were when you were 5, 6 years old. Figure out all of that, because when you go through this spiritual path, you kind of, or at least I did, I'm not going to talk for everyone, but you kind of regain this childlike sense of wonder about things, because it's like, oh, wow, there's this whole new world that's opened up to me. What's it about?
Right. That's so true, because as you enter into adulthood, it's like you need things to be solid and know that this is factual, like not factual, but this is it. This is
Mhm.
confirmed to be true. But unlike when you're in that child kind of like space, it's just exploration. It's like, well, that may be true. It may not be true. There may be other things that impact what you believe to be real. And so again, that's kind of looking beyond that box that we are kind of put into, just being as in the book, in the Four Agreements, where he says you become, I just had the word, and I lost it, domesticated into kind of like this society. But then in the spiritual journey, you're going into this space of like, no, it doesn't have to look a certain way. You don't have to be a certain way. And it's okay to not know. It's okay that things are not certain. And I think as human beings, we like things to be certain, because then we have more control. We feel like we have more control over maybe outcomes. But this exploration, it takes us in maybe into an uncomfortable place.
It definitely does. I mean, you know, when you're going through this, especially meditation, I don't know how many times a week, a day, people are telling me, you know, well, I don't think I meditate right because I can never quiet my mind. And it's, you know, what I always say is, well, that's okay. First off, when you're first meditating, you're not going to quiet your mind. You know, these thoughts that come up, these things that keep going and nudging and are incessantly going like this in your head, pay attention to that. Because these are the things that you still have opportunities with and still have the opportunity to work through. And you can recognize, okay, why is it that, you know, I can't get this out of my head? And as you do that, you'll notice, okay, that thought leaves. And then, you know, another one will eventually come in. And then when you recognize it again, you're like, okay, what is the reason behind this? And you notice that, then that'll leave. And then, you know, you have, depending on how old you are, you know, you can have 20, 30, 40 years of all of these thoughts that you've never taken the time to really connect with going in your head. So it makes complete sense that at first, you know, your mind might not quiet during meditation. It's not that you're doing it wrong. It's that you just got a lot of stuff you need to think through.
Yes, I've heard that so often that I can't meditate because my brain won't stop. And it's just like, well, that's part of the process of meditating. You know, our brain is kind of going to do what it's going to do, but it's maybe focusing on your breath or that awareness to help you begin to strengthen your practice, because that's basically what it is a practice.
It is.
So for those that are listening, they're like, okay, I know I'm on this journey. I know it's a spiritual journey. Or maybe since hearing what you've provided, they're like, people are listening like, okay, now I know what I'm on. I was confused at first, but now I get it. Let's go over some tips that you would like to provide some folks that are on their journey.
Yeah, definitely. So first off, be gentle with yourself. Social media, society, all of these things will kind of show you, movies will show you that the spiritual journey is like all rainbows, unicorns, ice cream, and la da 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 da, skipping through the, you know, a field of wildflowers and a pinafore dress. No, it's rough. And, you know, you're literally going through the first part of any spiritual journey tends to be the healing aspect. So you're going through healing all of these traumas and these things of your past, and just be gentle with yourself and recognize that it's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's okay. There is no set timeline. There is no set schedule. There's no set rubric for how your journey is supposed to look. So just be gentle with yourself. Another one would be to recognize that, you know, I'm not going to lie, not everything's a sign. You know, we get to a point where we're like, oh my goodness, all this great stuff is going on, and this is a sign, and this is a sign, and this is a sign, and this is a sign. Sometimes a bird is just a bird.
What? A bird is just a bird. There's no deeper meaning to that bird.
Now, like some, you know, and I'm not gonna lie, if you've never seen a hawk in your life, and then all of a sudden a hawk flies like 2 inches from your face, yeah, that's a sign. But if there's a dove's nest outside your window and now you're looking at it and you're like, what does it mean? It means that the dove decided to make its home at your window and it's comfortable there. Like, that's okay.
Right.
Sometimes, life is just life, and it's a beautiful thing, but not everything has that spiritual significance. Mm-hmm. And the third tip would be find a place where you're comfortable and people that you are comfortable with so that you can create a community, because the spiritual journey can feel very lonely, even with your partner. Especially because, again, there's no set rubric. So you guys could have started a spiritual journey together and then veer off, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But finding a community, finding at least one person who, you can talk to about this and not feel crazy, who isn't judging you, that is going to be the thing that helps you on those hard days. Mm-hmm. Because they will be there, and you might feel lonely, but having someone is there to help you is going to be so much better for you and for your mental health while you're going through that.
So true. Because when you're on that path and you're like questioning things and you're discovering who you are, that is most likely going to change the people that are around you. Mm-hmm. And so now people that are around you maybe for years, they're kind of like, I don't even know who you are anymore. And then you're probably like, I don't even know who I am anymore. I'm trying to figure this thing out myself. So that sense of community is so crucial. And again, going right to what you said in the beginning is to be patient with yourself, or take care of yourself, and just extending that grace is so important. And not to put a time frame on something of like, how long is it going to take? And that makes me think about kind of like this paradigm that we're in which, there's always an end to something, beginning to something, and just kind of thinking of time in this linear fashion. Do you think that kind of has any elements to why people are like, well, how far along am I? Or when is this going to be over? Do you think it has anything to do with us kind of looking at things from that linear perspective?
Oh, definitely. I mean, from the time we're little, it's okay. So, you're born, and then you go to, you learn how to walk or talk, then you learn how to do this, and then you go to school, and then you're taught in school, and then maybe you go to college or trade school, or you get a job, and then you're an adult. And then, there's these ages and these milestones. And so we're always taught this linear concept of time. And there is such thing as time, like it's 8:28 p.m. currently, but there is no such thing as, when you're going to be here or there in a spiritual journey. It's a spiritual journey for a reason. That thing continues. It is a journey. It's not it's not a sprint. It's a marathon. Mm-hmm. You will be going, and there will be times where, you feel like you're up here, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're down there, and you're like, what? I know nothing. I don't know how many times I learned something new, and then I'm like, I don't know anything at all. And I was raised in this. I'm 27 years old. Like I've seen all this stuff for 27 years, and I still am like, I don't know. So we do feel very rushed, because that's just how our society has put everything. So it's like, yeah, there's going to be a time, and no.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully those that are listening and they are experiencing this thing of like, how long, and they're looking at the time, hopefully that takes some of the pressure off, that you can just enjoy the experience and not feel that you have to rush to be able to do something, that you are here and you're having an experience, and just kind of enjoy the ride. And so that being said, we have Baseman Awakens. It says the spiritual path is a lonely path to take. You literally turn your back on the world. What are your thoughts about that comment?
The spiritual path can definitely be lonely at times, and it's interesting that your perspective is that you turn your back to the world, because you're turning your back on the world that you once knew. But you're not turning your back on the world, because there's a whole new one now laid out in front of you. And but even then, you still have to get to know it. So it can be lonely, but it's that, it'll be all right. And you'll turn around and you're going to see this whole new world that's going to be opened, and all these new doors that are going to be opened up for you that you wouldn't have even noticed were doors in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, that even though again, it could feel lonely and it could feel like, man, I don't relate to a lot of people, but I will say that there's also this freedom that comes with it of beginning to know, how do I want to say this? It's almost like a veil's been lifted, that how you've been viewing the world, and this veil's being lifted, and now you're starting to see things for what they really are. And with that, I think a freedom comes with that, because then you're able to really show up as who you are, because you're like, oh, so a lot of these things are not even real that folks or the powers that be are kind of placing in front of me. Like, now I'm able to look through the truth of a thing. And there's something that I think is really freeing about that.
There definitely is. It's almost, as you go down the spiritual path, you meet your authentic self, and then you can go, do I want to go back in that box where I was kind of pretending all the time? Because I like me now, and I want to keep doing this. And so the people that fall away, they fall away for a reason, and that's perfectly fine. The worlds, so to speak, that fall away, they fall away because maybe your authentic self doesn't resonate with that anymore. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, because you'll always end up finding people on your path. And even though there could be moments where it's like, man, I sure could use a friend right now. Like, throw me a friend line. But eventually those people will start to come into your life. And you know what? In kind of thinking about this, I love to get your thoughts. I wonder if, like, that period where it may feel lonely and isolating, maybe those are moments that we have to be alone. And maybe that's time where we get to kind of peel off the layers that everybody has placed on us during that alone time. Maybe that gives us a moment to kind of cut ourselves out from the thoughts, opinions of others, so that we can really go deeper into finding out who we are.
Oh yeah, definitely. That makes complete sense to me. We have to kind of sit with ourselves to get to know ourselves, so that we can, to your point, release those projections that other people have put on us. Because it's almost like, when kids go away to college or sleepaway camp or something like that, and, it's the first time that they get away from their parents, and then they're like, oh, and they go crazy because they're like, well, I don't have to do this anymore, and I don't have to do that, and I don't have to do this. And then they kind of go a little wild for a second because they're like, I don't have to fit into anyone's box. I can just do whatever. And it's almost like that. We need those moments of solitude, so that it's like, okay, well, let me do this. And also so that we can learn to like ourselves, because there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. You can be around a group of people in the middle of a big party. It could be your own birthday party, and you could feel very lonely. Or you could take yourself out on your birthday by yourself and be alone and have the best time.
That's so true. It's all about perspective. It's all about perspective. How are you looking at whatever is in front of you? So hopefully that helps. You, Baseman, let us know if you have any other questions about that. And I do want to say that you have the journal that you created, which I think can definitely be a benefit for people that are, whether you're beginning, you're on your journey, that can really help you just navigate and think more deeply. Can you speak a little bit more about the journal that you've created and how that can be helpful for our listeners?
Of course. So I created this journal. It's called A Year of Connecting. It is 12 different meditations. It'll take you through the course of a year. So each meditation is a guided meditation, and I invite you to record your voice to take yourself on these journeys. And basically, Each meditation lasts for 30 days. And then you are given not prompts, but just what was the information you got? What was the day that you did this? Was there homework that you were given, and all of these things? Because sometimes we do a journey or a meditation and, we get all this information and then we don't know what to do with it. So this is just a nice place to go and put all of these thoughts that you got during this meditation. And this is the guided version again, in a year of connecting, where, the first one will teach you to meet your spiritual guides. And then you'll go into meeting the different energies around you. And it's literally a year of you meeting and getting to know all these energies and forces that are around you, and learning how to connect with them. I also have a journey journal that doesn't include the meditations, and it is just called the Journey Journal for those of you who maybe just need a place to write down the information you get from your meditations in a more organized way, but don't necessarily like the guided aspect. Like, you might have a deeper meditation practice that's more personal to you and you want to continue on that. You just need a place to write your stuff down, and that would be the Journey Journal, where the a year of connecting is going to be that great starter, or, if not only starter, trust me, like, you don't need it as only a thing, but just where it's like, hey, these are 12 meditations you could do to meet all these different energies. Have you ever, sat there and tried to do a meditation with the sun and see, okay, how does the sun really make you feel? And then that allows you to have this deeper connection with the sun. So then on sunny days, you can, really maybe be in a place of more gratitude that you wouldn't have been in a year prior.
Beautiful. And so what you just said about just using the sun as an example, this spiritual journey just helps you to have just a more appreciation of everything around you.
It does.
It makes you just even, with nature. And I don't know how many times I've walked through a park, saw trees, and I never really paid attention because I had my headphones in, listening to music. And I'm just thinking about when I get to the end of this trail that I'm on, then I have to turn around and walk home. But taking a moment and say, you know what, I'm just going to observe what's around me. I'm going to look at the trees and see how we are connected to all of this. So when you said that about using the sun as an example, I think it's so important to realize that on this journey, it's just not about what's going on within you, but it's also recognizing our connection to nature, the world around us. And it may feel like I'm not a part of this world because it's crazy out here, but there still is some connection. Your just view has changed, but you still feel this connectedness of wanting people to become awake because you probably share your story with others. So what are your thoughts on that, just that connectedness to nature, especially when you're on a spiritual path?
You actually, as we said earlier, it's like you wake up and, you do realize that you're so connected. In my personal spiritual awakening and in meditating every day, I would sit outside and meditate, and I would just notice that, before I sat down and and got ready to meditate, I would just notice how quiet it was. And I was like, okay, it's quiet, whatever. But throughout my meditation and just sitting there in the, my backyard, in nature, I noticed everything waking up around me. And all of a sudden it was like I could, feel the wind on my face that I wasn't really aware of. It's not that it wasn't a windy day before, I just didn't notice. Or, hear all these birds around me. They were still there. I just wasn't listening to them. And so it's like, our eyes and ears open to things that we were almost too busy, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, or too caught up in the noise to even notice prior.
So true. I remember this, he's kind of like a mentor to myself and Dwayne. And I remember I was telling him, we go for these walks on the nature trail. And he's like, oh, do you ever listen to the trees? And I'm like, listen to the trees? When the trees are blowing? I was like, he's like, the tree's nature itself is always talking to you. And at first I was like, that sounds weird. And then I thought about it and I was like, well, everything has life. And everything is communicating something. So I was walking. So we went on there's a little greenway near where we live. So we went on and I'm looking at the trees like, is there something you want to tell me? I was trying to do it discreetly so no one saw me like, is she talking to trees? But so just, again, that connectedness and again, and that can help too. Maybe if you are feeling alone, just knowing that everything that's around you, that it is alive, it is a living thing. And so that you can show appreciation for it and spend time with it.
Yes, definitely. And, I have a client who I was working with recently, and she asked for a sign of her, guides and guardians and all these people around her to show her whenever she needed to, feel not alone. And the sign that they gave her was just the sun and the warmth of the sun. And I thought that was just such a beautiful thing, because it's like, that's the warmth of the sun. Any day of the week, every day, the sun is always there. Even on rainy days, there's always that moment where that, like, you feel the warmth of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just almost like that confirmation that, they're always around you. These, energies that are there for you are always there. So we're never really fully alone. We're just sometimes not paying attention.
Mm-hmm. So true. And I think that goes to what you were saying before about meditation. I think that's perfect for starting to then slow down, so that way we can start to pay attention. And journaling, using your journal to kind of help guide us to slow down, remember our breath, and just having that sense of awareness is so important. And for those that are listening that are saying, this sounds great, a lot of what you're saying is resonating with me, but I have a friend who's spiritual and he or she is doing X, Y, and Z. So I still think that it has to look a certain way. So what would you say for those that are still maybe thinking that the spiritual path or spiritual journey or spiritual awakening, that it still has to look a certain way? I know we've kind of talked through it, but if some folks are just now joining, that are still thinking that, I have to go buy my sage, or I have to go buy crystals, or I have to go buy incense, or anything along those lines, what would you say to them?
There are 7 billion people on this earth, and only identical twins look exactly the same. And I have twin nieces who are very similar, but even they're not the exact same. And they've been through every moment of their lives together. Mm-hmm. So there is not one way anything is supposed to look. And I know I can repeat that 1,000 times, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to click or, change your perspective. But look at, for example, Kai and I. We're having this beautiful conversation. We don't look exactly the same. Our spiritual paths don't look exactly the same, but there's neither one of us is minimizing the other one's path. Mm-hmm. So just allow yourself with that. You can layer what your friend does with what you do, but if it just doesn't feel right, that's okay. Honor yourself, because this is your path and your journey. So the person that needs to feel good with it is you. Mm-hmm. Nobody else. There is not one way this is ever going to look. There's not one, this sounds a little morbid, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to be spiritual. And however you find your personal spirituality is just that. With the Curio Curandera podcast, one of the things that I talk to people about are what are their traditional spiritual practices, and then what are their non-traditional spiritual practices. And what I mean by that is, what are the things that you do that you don't feel are spiritual, that deep down in like your heart of hearts connects you to spirit, to the universe, to God, whatever it is that you believe in. It could be painting, it could be drawing, it could be getting tattoos, it could be all of these things. And even if it doesn't look spiritual, if it makes you feel like you're connecting to a higher power, then it's spiritual for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So hopefully, that really resonates. And again, I know sometimes if you're looking at social media, it can kind of paint spirituality in a certain light. But again, this is about your path and your journey. So it has to look like what it needs to look like for you, so that you can begin to heal and as you said, show up as your authentic self. So we are going to be wrapping up. The time went by so fast. So if anybody has any questions, please drop your questions or comments in the box provided, so that we can make sure that we address them. And if people want to listen to your podcast, how can they do so? We do have the link. I just want to say we do have the link in the description box, but what's kind of like the time, day of the week or so that people can tune in?
So my podcast comes out once a month on the 26th of every month. And you can find the Curio Curandera Podcast on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Amazon, and basically all of the main Google Podcasts, all the main podcast streaming devices or services.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's where you can find my podcast. And if you're local to Charlotte, you can find me just about every day, except Mondays. I do not work Mondays. At Curio Craft and Conjure, which is in Noda.
Yeah, so you guys that are listening, make sure you go to the description box. That way you can find all the information that we discussed today. So let's see, any other questions? Be sure to drop them before we sign off for the night. And Gianna, is there any other messages that you would like to leave our audience with tonight?
So this is going to sound a little funny, but I'm going to give you all some homework. Do something every day for the next 21 days that brings you joy. I find that we get lost in life sometimes, and we forget to do the things that connect us to our happiness. So even if it's listening to your favorite song, eating a Snicker while you're stuck in traffic, a Snickers while you're stuck in traffic, do something every day that brings you joy.
Perfectly said. And especially during everything that's going on right now, you have to find that space where you can make sure that you are, that you're happy, that you experience your happiness, defend your happiness. So that's awesome, 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 awesome words of wisdom. And if people want to purchase your journal, your 2 journals, how can they do that?
You can purchase the journals on Amazon, or you can go to Curio Curandera, CurioCurandera.com and purchase the books there directly, or you can purchase them online at CurioCharlotte.com or at Curio Craft and Conjure.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I want to thank my wonderful guests. Gianna, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was an absolute pleasure to host you. And I know I was waiting for this moment for a long time, so I'm so happy that we were able to connect and bring you on, and always welcome back anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for this wonderful conversation with all of these great questions, because you really made me think. I enjoyed that. And thank you all for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you.
Thank you so much. So thank you all again for listening. Be sure to join me here next Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our new episode. I hope you all have a great night.
Have a peaceful evening.
Come to